Hello all, so we're going to talk in this presentation about the new ideologies that emerge um, contributing to the revolutions of 1848. So liberalism. We've already brushed upon liberalism because it is one of the major tenets that is driving the revolution in France that we've already studied. Let's just recap um, relatively briefly. So liberalism is stemming from a lot of Enlightenment ideas. I would argue that the most important liberal thinker that we should keep in the back of our heads is John Locke, um, because one of the major things that Locke values in particular is self-government, right? The idea that government should not come from above, but rather below. The idea of a government is to protect the natural rights of citizens rather than establish a sort of oppressive rule. Um, so liberalism was meant to be more kind of reformist in its political nature. It wasn't meant to be overly revolutionary. A more radical ideology is revolutionary. So when we talk about socialism, we'll see that as more revolutionary. So again, liberalism is meant to protect natural rights. Rights, really the best way to guarantee them is through a written constitution. Okay, we'll see governments like France have a written constitution. Britain does not. We're going to see other countries like Austria play with written constitutions, and of course the United States with the longest lasting um, written constitution in Western society. So they want these constitutions to do many similar things. They want them to protect individual freedoms, like the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the right to a trial in the form of habeas corpus, and so on. So many constitutions have similar provisions. It's important also to realize that liberalism, as we know it in the 19th century, is not the same as liberalism today. Liberalism now is more reminiscent of what radicalism was then. So liberals are now often associated with advocating for the poor, supporting things like like general welfare. Liberals in the 19th century we refer to as classical liberals. In other words, they really are only trying to protect their own rights. They're not promoting equality for all. So liberalism in the 19th century, or classical liberalism as we call it, was much more moderate in nature. They're really trying to just protect the values of the middle class. They still believe that the only people that should vote are people that meet property qualifications, so they are not advocating universal suffrage. That's going to be more of a radical idea. And going along with 19th century liberalism, it's also important to realize that in terms of economics, they believe that there should be little to no government interference in the economy. So this is, of course, laissez-faire economics, which was written about, kind of championed by Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So basically what The Wealth of Nations is a book that's very persuasive, discussing why laissez-faire economics is so beneficial to the state and to individual wealth. He coins the term invisible hand, which basically is an idea that the market regulates itself, that there's no need for the government to interfere in the economy. Laissez-faire economics also is basically the exact opposite of mercantilism. And he also believes that the only way to ensure equal opportunity is to have a free market and no government interference in the economy. So we're going to see that believers in laissez-faire are also not not very radical in nature because they are opposed to things like labor unions, and they instead support free competition in the workplace. So basically, they're going to be less. They're really not going to be advocating for the average worker if they are opposed to labor unions. All right, so how does liberalism kind of affect 19th century Europe? Well, we're going to see that that there are going to be some revolutionary movements in the 19th century that are inspired by liberals. Liberals do influence some of the revolutions in France that we're going to talk about in a little while. Also, there are going to be a lot of liberal ideas that are in many European constitutions, particularly in the German Confederation. between 1815 and 1848. Liberalism is also going to influence some reform in Britain in the 1830s up through the 20th century. We're going to see that there are going to be some student protests that result in Prussia from liberal ideas, and also in Russia, which is less influenced by liberalism, but still we're going to see some reforms in Russia result from liberalism. Nationalism, we're going to talk about even more briefly. Basically, nationalism is, of course, the strong national identity um, that kind of brings about unity in a country. Nationalism is brought about by common language, history, traditions, basically, trying to turn the cultural unity that already exists in a country to political unity. So nationalism is going to encourage more political and economic unity in a place like the German Confederation. In the Industrial Revolution, we already talked about the Zollverein, right? The tariff union in Germany that allowed things like railroads and just industry in general to develop more efficiently. That's an example of nationalism in Germany, and economic nationalism. Liberals are very supportive of nationalism, and we're going to see that the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars inspired nationalism very much in countries outside of France because they are emerging up in opposition to the French Revolution. But also, you're going to see some liberals emerge as nationalistic, and they believe that um, drafting a new constitution inspired by liberal ideas is the best way to embrace nationalism. Um, Again, economic developments that took place during the Industrial Revolution also encourage more national identity. The idea that their state is developing a strong economy. This also makes people proud to be part of their country. Um, but also, nationalism kind of inspires people to believe that their country is better than all other countries, so it does inspire sort of a we versus they mentality. Okay, socialism. So what causes socialism? Of course, the growing sense of class consciousness that we already talked about in chapter 22. So, the fact that the working class is very miserable in their working conditions. Um, you're going to see socialism is opposed to the laissez-faire economics of liberalism. They believe that government should be more republican in nature, so they are opposed to monarchies or even constitutional monarchies. Um, they they believe that things like laissez-faire economies, capitalism, is very selfish, and it encourages the fragmenting of society along class lines. Um, it's really not until the 19th century that you're going to see liberals embrace the idea of social justice. So this is going to be something really that only socialists believe in. So some examples of some early French socialists. A lot of them are also considered utopian socialists because of their very kind of radical ideas about what society should be like as opposed to what it was like. Some of them opposed private property. Main examples: the Count Henry of Saint-Simon. All these, by the way, all these early socialists are French. I believe I just said that, but just in case. Um, so actually, some of these socialists kind of differ in nature because Saint-Simon actually was not opposed to industrialization. He did believe that it was going to bring a lot of benefits to Europe, um, but he did believe that the upper classes were exploiting the working class, and he called them the parasites of society. So he was looking particularly at the aristocracy, lawyers, the clergy members. They believed that the major players in the Industrial Revolution were what he called the doers. Um, so he embraced scientists, engineers, and industrialists. All right, he believed that the main way to improve Europe was to embrace public works projects that benefit all Europeans, um, and also establishing investment banks that would better improve European economies as a whole by investing in industrial projects like railroads, which again benefit everyone, give everybody jobs. He believed that every social institution should have a main goal of improving the conditions for the poor, because otherwise you're going to see increased social stratification. Another French socialist is Charles Fourier. He believes that there should be a planned economy and socialist communities, so again, a more equal distribution of wealth. He was very detailed in terms of what a socialist utopia would be made up of. He actually implemented some of his ideas for utopian communities in the United States, which were briefly successful, but of course we see the United States, evolve as a capitalist economy eventually. He also was very supportive of women's equality, but some people labeled Charles Fourier as too revolutionary because of this idea. Louis Blanc is probably the most important French socialist that you should be familiar with, because he actually has a prominent role in the French government. He's a little bit more practical than other French utopian socialists, but he is radical in the sense that he believes in universal suffrage, because he believes that workers should have more control of the state, and universal suffrage allows them to peacefully take control of the state rather than revolt violently. He also believes that government-backed workshops and factories will guarantee full employment, so the government actually should take a very active role in shaping industrial development and who works. The last French utopian socialist you should be familiar with is Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who believed that capitalists were stealing property from the worker, and the worker really was a true source of all wealth in industrial Europe. He was considered anarchistic in nature, and he feared the power of the state. Okay, so what's the difference between French utopian socialists and Marxists? French utopian socialists kind of are looking back to the French Revolution, kind of yearning to return to the radical stage of the French Revolution that had a planned economy. Remember that there was a period kind of in the during the Reign of Terror where you had a planned economy in France, right, that was successful in terms of appeasing the sans-culottes. They are advocating this. And also, unlike Marxism, we're going to see that French utopian socialists are trying to get the middle class involved. They believe that it is the middle class who's going to help the poor. Okay, so in that sense, they're not really advocating a change in the economy from only coming from the working class, which is what Marxists believe in. Okay, last but not least, Marxists. Obviously the root of Marxism is from Karl Marx, but also Frederick Engels is very significant because these two men put together the Communist Manifesto, which is a book that is considered the Bible of socialism. What the Communist Manifesto does is it outlines the class consciousness and the ongoing class struggle that exists between the rich and the poor. Its chief belief is that the middle class is exploiting the working class. Again, similar to some French utopian socialists, like Proudhon in particular, the true wealth of society is a result of the working class, and basically the middle class is kind of stealing that wealth from them. They believe that society is going to be increasingly divided when modern industry develops. So they articulate this clear difference between the bourgeoisie, which is the middle class, and the proletariat. They believe that the most important value of a product comes from the labor rather than from the middle class, who just basically owns the labor and employs people. So basically they believe that the worker only gets a small portion of what he should be earning from the fruits of his labor. They believe that socialism is inevitable, right? That capitalism is kind of self-destructive because it's going to result in overproduction and unemployment, which eventually is going to cause the working class to rebel. And they believe that the rebellion that will eventually result is definitely going to be violent. And they also are proponents of women's rights. They believe that women are doubly oppressed because, first of all, they are oppressed by capitalists who pay them lower wages than men, and also society in general oppresses women because they give women second-class status. And we're going to see that women eventually play a very influential role in socialist movements, especially the revolutions of 1848. So we'll pick up with the actual revolutions of 1848 in a future video.